It's good to be back with you for day 2, in which we're looking at this barrier of fear, overcoming fear that we may flourish in our faith. The key phrase we looked at yesterday was this, right? Fear paralyzes, love mobilizes. And we're going to dive right back in to 2 Timothy 1. Remember that change, the way we begin to overcome fear, is by exchanging it for love. All right, so hear Paul's words to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1, 6 through 8. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift God has given you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gives is not that of fear, but power, love, and self-discipline. Therefore, do not be ashamed of me, the Lord's prisoner, nor of the gospel, but join me in suffering by the power of God. Again, what I really love about this is Paul is telling Timothy, who is afraid, fan into flame. Now, if I were to ask you to identify a current area of fear, my guess is, if you're like me at least, that has led to being very passive. And what Paul is telling Timothy here is to replace the passivity with something active. And he goes on to tell him, Timothy, God hasn't given you the spirit of fear. Now, I know this might be stating the obvious, but I think it's so important for us to hear it. Any fear that may be wreaking havoc in our lives is not from God. Now, in the context of this letter, the reason Timothy is lacking confidence and the reason he's suffering and dealing with fear is he has all sorts of pressure. Pressure within the church of those opposing him, pressure outside of the church opposing him. And the crux of the matter is this: Timothy is being tempted to compromise his convictions. And isn't that what fear does? It erodes away at our convictions and it tempts us to compromise them. Now, in the context, Timothy was being despised because of his youth. Now, we might not be able to relate to that specifically, but can't we relate to some sort of weakness causing us to be looked down upon? Either by others or by ourselves. Perhaps it's, oh, I don't know enough. I don't have enough education. I have a part of my past that I'm not proud of. But any number of things that we look down on ourselves. And here's the danger, though. When we begin to take those weaknesses and insecurities and compare ourselves to others, it is like throwing gasoline on a fire, and it ignites fear in our lives because we're going down that path in which we're feeling insecure. Now, here's the thing. This is so important to get. Listen to Paul's words, 1 Corinthians 1, 26 through 29. I'm going to paraphrase them. Brothers and sisters, consider your calling when you were called by God. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were noble by human standards. But God takes the weak things of this world to shame the strong, and he takes the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. And so what Paul is saying, our weaknesses, they're not the means in which we are disqualified. They are actually the means by which God qualifies us. Paul goes on in another letter and he actually says, I boast in my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So next time we're tempted to fall into fear through a means of comparison, let's remember Paul's imagery of the body of Christ. God has given each of us a role to play. He doesn't want me to play the role of someone I'm insecure about, right? Imagine, humanly speaking, if my arm, if it was jealous of my leg, and therefore I had 3 legs and an arm, right? It just wouldn't make any sense. But spiritually speaking, it's the same. And so the greatest tragedy in life is not to be looked down upon like Timothy was. The greater tragedy is to allow our fear to move us off of the playing field and onto the sidelines, right? So let's fan into flame the gifts God has given us. Let's let our love be greater than our fear, and let's get onto the playing field of life.